So I was out walking at our park today, but I just wanted to do a video because Cellebrite had their summit this past week. And of course, Heather and Jared Barnart were in attendance and they spoke, but they also had FBI agent Jeffrey Tanzola up on the stage with them, and they discussed the Idaho 4 case. And what was very interesting is they brought up the fact that no evidence is evidence. And that was in reference to inmate 163214's digital activity before and after the murders and habit changes that he had. Now, we do know he changed his habit physically and that he had averaged 6 visits a month to Moscow since he had moved to the Pullman area, but he never went back to Moscow again after November 13th, even though he was still in the area for a month after the murders. But I'll play you some clips from the summit about his digital behavior because it was very interesting.
The FBI got involved because obviously they have jurisdiction in the United States, and the Moscow police and the Idaho State Police reached out for assistance. They also reached out for the assistance of the Pennsylvania State Police. So we worked very closely with Pennsylvania State Police. And, ironically, I wasn't called into this case initially for digital forensics. I'm sure some of you in the room, sometimes digital forensics, we're one of the big keystones for evidence, but maybe we're also forgotten. So actually, I was called in for the tactical operation. We weren't sure who was going to affect the arrest. Pennsylvania State Police ended up affecting the arrest, and the FBI ended up collecting the evidence. So the evidence response team, and then I was out there collecting the digital evidence. So ironically, I wasn't really notified initially. And remember, it was like 48 days after the event before we were able to get out there and make the arrest. So a lot of time had lapsed in there. So once we got the digital evidence, it wasn't a case where we were asked to take the initial look at the evidence. And, a lot of times when you get a phone, you get a computer, and there's a lot of evidence that just jumps off the screen at you. This was not the case with that. For those that have been following it, it was the complete opposite of that. So we'd been working on it, and when you get a phone, you get a computer, you might have one of your partners take a look at the digital evidence. So the digital evidence, I may have been missing something, right? So I get another examiner to take a look at it, they come and take a look, and we're still not finding anything. Ironically, this was tool agnostic. We used all the tools that we had available to us, and we were still coming up with not a lot of evidence that really supported much. We have a good partnership with Cellebrite, and we actually had Cellebrite executives at the RCFL, and we were just talking about, advancements in digital forensics. What do we need? What can you provide? And they mentioned that, if there's a big case you have, we might be able to help you with parts of that. And ironically, I took up on that. But it's not my case, right? It's not my case. It's a Moscow, Idaho case. It's an Idaho State Police case. It's the county prosecutor's case. So I made the pitch to them, hey, I think we have some experts out there that can get involved in that. And that's really how the ball started rolling.
Okay, so that was FBI agent Jeffrey Tanzola talking about how he made the decision to approach Moscow police about bringing in the Barnharts and Cellebrite due to the lack of finding digital evidence on inmate 163214's devices. And the next clip is just going to talk about the importance of how this digital evidence, and actually the lack of digital evidence being important evidence, helped build the case against him.
This is what built that solid case that really supported the DNA findings. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for me, I touched on a little bit. It was the lack of evidence that I was able to find on the phone. We processed it, we parsed it out, we were looking at it. And again, a lot of time had passed, 48 days had passed. But you'd still think you'd be able to find remnants on that phone or his computer.
And figuring out, why don't we have it? Is it because it was 48 days and the evidence was purged? But then slowly realizing that he cleaned up, like he prevented his digital footprint. The laptop was worse. He went all the way back from October The phone, Jared will dive into a little bit on, it was less of a cleanup and he became a little bit more sloppy with it. But I'm curious if he did all his research on how to do the cleanup, because the stuff that he did, most people wouldn't know on the laptop because that gap was so big.
So did you catch that? He cleaned up. So whenever somebody says, oh, but there was no evidence on his devices that he may have been looking up the girl's information or he may have looked on Zillow to see the layout of the house, we don't know because he scrubbed his digital devices. But let's continue.
Yeah, I mean, I think initially trying to approach this piece of data was challenging. It's a little odd to come in, like get that invitation, hey, come in, and I'm like, I feel like I found something, but
Here's my bag of you know what.
Jeff probably already found that, right? And just sort of working through, like the curiosity in us as digital forensic examiners, you want to go down the rabbit holes, you want to, check every box. And so definitely fell victim to that of like probably redoing work that you'd already done. But the reality was the evidence to be found was in the stuff that isn't easy, isn't parsed, and that, really isn't in your face. And so it became a very slow manual process of basically doing searches for anything that had a timestamp in all the formats of timestamps to go look for that was within the scope of when this crime happened. Running keyword searches on the entire file system, just hoping for one hit of a victim name, and then finding a hit, and it's like, oh, well, that's just the Reddit article that was after the crime, right? So there was so much noise and so much just unknown, and a lot of time spent looking at a whole lot of not the smoking gun that we were looking for.
Oh, no smoking gun, you might think. Well, can't really add to the case, but that's not true. Listen to the FBI agent in this next clip.
The only thing I would add to the group here is the flashlight was there. Like, if you looked at it in the timeline, his normal activity, and then, absolutely no activity for a certain time frame. Obviously, the time frame around the homicide, and then activity again. So there was that beacon of, we need to look at this, but it was that deep dive that you needed to do that just doesn't come out with just general regular parsing.
Yep, changes in his normal activity pattern.
Yeah, maybe let me just take that one step further. When we showed up, Jeff handed us a piece of paper. It wasn't like we had to figure out where this time frame was.
Beautiful piece
it was
of paper.
The CAST team, so they do the mapping, the cellular mapping for the FBI. They had looked through his historical records and tried to pick out any time where his phone had a dead period, no activity, for at least the same amount of time as when it was powered off on this night. And so we had 4 different time periods to sort of go look at. But one of them was obviously when the homicides had occurred. So we didn't have to figure that part out. It was like this minute to that minute, and we had to figure out the sort of the things around it.
So he only had 4 periods of large inactivity like the morning of the murders. 4. So what does that mean? That means that when Ann Taylor tried to say that he was out of range because he'd often go hiking or stargazing outside of Pullman, down at places like Wawawi Park, that blows that excuse out of the water. Because if that was his normal habit, and he was truly out of range for hours at a time when he was doing that, then there would be more than 4 instances of that. But let's continue.
And think about when you said normal activity. He was not normal. He had 16 contacts. I think 18 total. One was like AT&T,
And
customer service, maintenance. So he did not have friends. He did not chat with people. He had hour-long conversations with his parents. So it also felt weird on where is the normal. So his normal was also really uncomfortable for me.
Asterisk, his normal.
Yes.
And that's another important point, the lack of contacts. 16 contacts in his phone, but some of them were businesses, not people, not friends. For the people that are trying to claim that he didn't commit this crime alone, He was a loner. He didn't have friends, so who would have committed the crime with him? He did it by himself. And things like his phone contacts back up that he did not have people that he was in a large circle of friends with that he would be able to draw anyone from to go commit a murder with.
So with all this information or lack of information, holes in his, in the evidence and in the digital trail, was there like one specific moment? Was there an aha moment, or was it just like a series of, little moments that finally came together? I guess what really clicked?
I think it was little moments that kind of came together. His hard drive was glaringly absent. And for me, that was weird. So then I had to walk myself through, okay, how do I teach people this log means this file means this? But then when you're cleaning the file that tracks the cleaning, I was like, you got to be kidding me. And then I also was thinking, what will the defense say? So the whole criminology, like he has this, is that normal? Could he have been researching something? Sure. The fact that he had eraser on his system, I can't prove that it didn't run when a virus scan ran. So there were so many things that just gave me doubt. But I think all of that cleanup, what are you hiding? That was the biggest thing for me.
Maybe some of you erase everything off your digital items frequently. I personally don't know of anyone that does off their personal devices. I know workplace devices, yeah. And those are normally automatically ran anyway by your employer. But I don't know of anyone that's that meticulous about erasing things off their own personal devices. And also the fact that earlier in those clips, they said that it was specific to before the murders when he had went back and scrubbed things. Not so much afterwards. So just seems very suspicious. And when you put it together with the totality of evidence, it is damning.
So really went digging into, again, just finding any timestamp that was associated to this moment. And we found a couple files, and I guess the bigger picture that sort of these aha things kind of came together was he was, let's say, his normal behavior was he would browse the internet like you and I, and he would do his things. But at some point leading up to the crime, months before, he started to use a VPN, which is not by itself an indicator of crime. But then, right as we lead up to the days of the crime about to happen, he went in and turned off his Wi-Fi on his phone. So he didn't want it to connect to anything, which is quite odd. That was a file that is not understood by us. It was a random thing, and it was a text to Josh like, hey, I'm seeing this file. This is what the log looks like. I don't understand it, but I think it might be this. And Josh said, I got you. And he starts testing. One of the very fortunate things in this case was Heather had the exact phone model on the same carrier that BK had. So then we were able to do additional testing on these things and become confident in sort of the findings.
So he starts using a VPN in the months before the murders, and then right before the murders, turns off his Wi-Fi. Doesn't want it connecting to anything in the days leading up to the murders. Yeah, like they say, on its own, maybe not suspicious, but when you start adding everything up, as we talk about the totality of evidence, then it becomes suspicious.
I would say probably the most damning thing, and Andrew, you mentioned the sheath, and the sheath definitely gets us to him. But I think the most damning thing for this being a premeditated crime is the confidence that we had in saying that he was awake at 2 whatever in the morning, physically pressing the button on the side of his phone, and that device powering off while it was at 100% charge, right? So I think what that does for us is the defense might say, well, phones die when you're at home, asleep, forgot to plug it in, whatever. All of that was gone, right? We had him awake for sure, turning it off, and then a little over 2 hours later, turning it back on. When he turned it back on, we had found another file that sort of does a, am I near Wi-Fi, am I near Wi-Fi, and then he wasn't near any known Wi-Fi. So the log was, again, painting another picture, and CASP was able to say, like, all right, he's now hitting a tower that's way over here, he's not at home.
He physically turned the phone off with 100% power. For the people that keep saying the battery could have died, he was out of range, that's why there was no connection, no. He purposely turned it off at 100% power. And he purposely powered it back on not long after the murders.
Can I just
Yeah,
explain
sure,
CAS?
yeah.
I just want to explain CAS. So the cellular analysis surveillance team. So not only did we do the digital forensics, and I say we, I'm saying we, the FBI, because I don't do CAST, but then it's also marrying it up with the call detail records, like the locations, the stuff you can get from tower dumps and things like that. So we married up both of those together, and they were key components. So for people that don't know what CAST was.
Yeah. And so you saw this pattern of life that changed leading up to the crimes. And then on the other side of it, now that he's committed the crimes and is settling in and hyper-focused on all of the news and everything that's happening, you saw him stop using the incognito mode that he had started using. You see him stop using the VPN. He goes back to his normal, which I think is pretty damning in that, like, basically building up these walls around the moment that he knew he was going to commit a crime.
The perfect bookend.
Heather summed that up very well. The perfect bookends. In the weeks leading up to the murders, he had changed his digital behavior. Started using VPNs, incognito mode, turned off the Wi-Fi. After the murders, back to his old digital habits. Now in this next segment, they're going to talk about how they really tried not to watch any news media, any outside information about the case.
And it was obviously national news, but for me specifically, it was pretty easy to tune out. I did have other examiners come in and give me tidbits and stuff, but for me specifically, I kind of live in a hole, so not you guys.
So I remember it showed up on my TikTok, just things about the crime scene. And I mentioned it to Jared, and he was like, do not watch that stuff, Heather. Do not. You don't want to have this influence. So I took my own advice and did trust but verify. And I called Ian, and I said, Ian, and Karen Reed, did you watch all the stuff? Did you? Because the whole Dateline thing came out too.
And now they talk about the leak. And they did not have anything to do with the leak. So, sounds like they're still trying to find the leaker.
When the Dateline thing came out, the judge reached out to all of us saying, who has access to Magna Axiom reports? Who has access to this? And I was like, I'll sign it, Jeff. I don't think we have any of those things. And what was interesting, I was like, whatever they reported, I didn't find that. Like, I don't see what they're saying existed. So we signed it, but then it was this other fear of someone leaked to the media. And it was another fear tactic on the pressure. So stay away from the media, don't watch anything. But
I think what she was trying to say was I gave her great advice, and Ian validated that. So, no, it was impossible, but we did good to avoid, because when Dateline happened, we didn't even know that it happened, and then we got contacted by the prosecutor's office. They're like, sure, we'll sign whatever, because it definitely wasn't us. We didn't know that existed.
And then they made us promise to not watch it, even after the plea.
Yeah, so we didn't read anything. We wanted to show up and speak to just what we knew about this small piece in this investigation.
I would throw this out to the room. We do a pretty good job, we, the FBI, of tracking the evidence that went out the door. They beat me up a little bit about the conditions they worked in, but we didn't release the evidence, right? So we try to protect it like that. And I'm throwing it out there to everybody in the room, because that was a judge's concern. That was a prosecutor's concern with this information that was leaked out. And we did get calls from the judge's office about who had access to it, who did you release the data, the results to. And we're very fortunate because we have chain of custody logs. Mm-hmm. Did you sign one?
Yes.
Yes, right? I didn't give them anything without.
It's only with you.
You're right. I'm the only one that made her sign one, but we could delineate who had access to it, our internal network, when you logged in, when you logged off. So we had very quick answers for that.
So for anyone saying that the judge wasn't looking into the leak and that the prosecution wasn't in either, that's not true. It's being looked into, still to this day. Now, why They haven't found the leaker yet. I don't know, but they obviously are going through the process of eliminating those that didn't. So we'll just have to stay tuned on that one.
My biggest takeaway from this is when there isn't evidence, figuring out why. So if your tool isn't parsing something, I remember we used multiple tools as well. And I wanted to make sure, is Physical Analyzer missing it? Did we just not parse it? And then realizing very quickly, it's not there. There isn't anything to parse. But making sense of the lack of data being the best data and proving intentions behind a crime.
So see what she talked about? Making sense of the lack of data being the best data. That proves intentions behind a crime. So sometimes lack of evidence is evidence. And in this case, it was, because it showed his habit changes in his data usage and the measures he went through to scrub his devices, to hide his activity, turned his phone off at 100% power, turned his Wi-Fi off, and then after the murders, back to normal digital behavior again. So, I know a lot of you always say, oh, you know, there's too many coincidences in this case, but yet you always overlook the coincidences when it comes to inmate 163214. Because either he's the unluckiest man in the world that everything lined up like this, the car, his phone, his habits, everything, or he did it. And the correct conclusion is that he did it. You had 5+ agencies working on this case. His DNA on the sheath at the scene was a match. He admitted guilt. It's time to reconcile yourself to that fact and move on.